Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sotul, and I am joined by Derek, middle-class Fury Brown, and we have another decider match coming up for you. It is not quite time for Yokad. We have another little appetizer for you before we get to that one, and it's going to be the aggro lineup that Killing All Day is bringing himself, but piloted in a different form by Turna going up against Rugal here. Derek, initial thoughts on this matchup?
I think while we have been hyping up how good of a pick we thought the aggressive lineup was, it's not necessarily perfectly positioned up against his opponent here. There's a couple of decks that might prey on the aggressive strategies with the likes of Mage and Priest, and none of the really vulnerable decks like Rogue or Hunter.
Well, don't have to wait too long because the players are ready. So first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Rugal!
After defeating his idol in Dog, Rugal has his work cut out for him in Turna.
And his opponent looking to make it clean sweep so far for Europe. It's Turna!
Definitely a strong lineup builder, but can Turna keep a level head in order to advance?
Most of the tournament is played before the deck lists are sent. I think it's a game all about preparation. I thought that a lot of players will have brought some anti-control decks, like Recruit Hunter or Miracle Rogue. Paladin was a good choice if you see all the 16 players. Unfortunately for me, my group is tough. I face 2 players with Control Priest. I don't think that is going to be a great deck in this tournament, but against me, it's going to perform well. If we are going to play 100 times, they're going to win the most of the time because their lineups are favored against mine. But in the single match, everything can happen. I think I'm pretty good in making good lineups in tournaments. Killing All Day has the same lineup as mine, but his group is all playing Miracle Rogue and anti-control decks, and he's going to farm them. So I'm proud of my lineup, and I think I made good choices.
So Turna there talking about how he felt like he had some bad matchups in his group, but you know, on any given day he can just get through them. Didn't have a stronger group for the aggro lineup as Killing All Day did. How's his decks going to do against Rugal in particular, Derek?
I think here for Rugal, with what I would argue are 3 fairly strong anti-board based aggro decks, or control decks, sorry, to fight back against the aggro in the Priest, the Mage, and the Even Warlock that we see there. Even having to be banned away the Control Priest by Turna, it could be difficult for Turna to take this unless he can target that Taunt Druid in particular, as I'm seeing a weak spot for Rugal.
Yeah, and with that Control Priest ban, we talked about this in our last series. Paladin was banned in the last series we cast, which made it the 7th different class ban in the tournament. Already the most versatile field of bans we've ever seen in HCT. That was ban number 8 for Priest, meaning only Warrior was not banned in this tournament. And that was only brought by one person in race who had a very, very weak group to be bringing Quest Warrior.
Absolutely. If he had run into Turna or Killing All Day with both their... Yeah, exactly. With Paladin and Token Druid, you don't really have much choice there because it's 2 pretty much unwinnable matchups. But here for Rugal, a matchup we've seen a tremendous amount of times so far here at the Summer Championships. The 2 most represented decks, Even Warlock being the first and Taunt Druid number 2. How are you feeling about this matchup now? Has anything changed in your perception of it, or is it still pretty much as you were anticipating beforehand?
My perception is similar. My enthusiasm for it may have waned just a little bit. I think TJ and Admirable, made the call that this was the matchup that was really defining this championship, and I think that is very much the case.
As there have been a lot of, I would argue, like minutiae in terms of the detail you have to play around that have been, you like that word?
I love it. Carry on.
That have been developing
dirty to me
throughout the series. Well, you've already got your next thing to say in between my name next time.
Yes. All right.
Perfect. You can't say that. I'm banning you. But some small details that have been evolving I've seen throughout the series. Players tapping less, I would argue, as the Warlock, especially when on the coin, to counteract against the the effects of Naturalize, because here Turna, by throwing out another card here, he only needs his Mountain Giant to be cheap enough. The difference between 3 and 4 makes basically no difference. So making sure he's that little bit less vulnerable to Naturalize, it's stuff like that that's starting to see develop amongst the players.
Yeah, we've seen people go for example, for the tap Giant route on turn 5, for example. And even then, that just, as you said, makes you a little bit more vulnerable to that Naturalize play coming out from the Druid, which, you know, if the Naturalize isn't going to happen, your Mountain Giant is just a terror to the game state. So playing around the eventuality where it does just makes a lot of sense.
As well for Turna.
Having said that, Turna goes for exactly what I was talking about, the tap Giant line. There is a free tap, but it does then fill up that hand and make you more vulnerable to burning some cards.
But then there's a further benefit for this line of play that maybe we haven't seen in all the games, is there is a Hooked Reaver already sitting in hand for Turna, and we know that Rugal, at least in the early game, is going to be very reluctant to actually do any face damage to Turna, so that Hooked Reaver cannot become activated. So maybe Turna here saying, even if you do Naturalize me, I've got such a strong follow-up with Drake, and if I can activate that Hooked Reaver as well, it's not even too bad if you Naturalize here and I burn an extra card.
It's a great point.
So many possibilities.
Turna just considering the rationing of his options here. We've seen many people really just have to tempo out a few Hooked Reavers in this tournament already as a 4-4. It's not looking like that's going to be anywhere near the case for Turna here. He has plenty of threats just to be able to chew through, but wants to be weaving in life taps still, as you mentioned, just to be able to line up the right turn where, you know, his Gen Greymane has been used, his Twilight Drake has been used. That's the turn where he wants to be finding himself around 15 health so he can start to push out that Hooked Reaver.
That's right. And we've been seeing players making the play that I would argue is not actually even that ridiculous in this scenario of just tapping again. Because yes, you do end up burning a card, but if you're burning so many cards anyway from a Naturalize, which you haven't even seen on the turn prior, taking 2 extra damage is just good. It just ends up activating your Hooked Reaver that little bit earlier, and you've already found a bunch of the good cards in this matchup. You've got Drake, Giant, Hooked Reaver, Gul'dan, the Black Knight in particular, as a very strong tempo card in this matchup.
Yeah, and it sounds, you know, it sounds like we've kind of flip-flopped around there, because we started off saying, well, you know, maybe you tap a bit less so you don't get cards burned from Naturalize. Or, well, then maybe you tap a bit more and burning cards is fine. But, you know, the message to take away is that it's in a state of flux at all times. You have to react to the game state, react to how many threats you have in hand, and are those threats specifically Hooked Reaver? Has your opponent shown any sign of having Naturalize? In this case, no. Your Mountain Giant has just sat there the whole time.
Exactly. And with the lines of play that lead to Hooked Reaver, you have to commit to it completely, because if you don't, you've just ended up taking 4 extra damage for no reason, and you don't have an activated Hooked Reaver. You have to, it's an instance of clearly setting out what your game plan is going to be, as Turna consistently is kind of showing us that. It's playing the best thing he can, as quick as he can. No kind of messing about with any of the weaker minions to do any kind of tricksy plays. Against Druid, there isn't really much of a punish for just doing the best thing you can as quick as you can.
Very slow start here from Rugal. Just finding that nourish on this turn to push him up towards those Sleepy Dragons in hand, but he's been doing next to nothing through this opening, and Turner's really had the great hand to punish for him. It's nothing spectacular so far has been required in terms of play from Turna. It's really just those micro details in the life taps that we've been talking through, but he's just had the requisite number of threats to just keep up this pressure on Rugal.
That's exactly right, and the situation we've talked about a fair amount for the Taunt Druid when you're up against a rogue in particular, as we mentioned, where one big taunt doesn't do a good enough job to fight back against an already developed board state from your opponent. And now with the really lovely tech decision we're seeing from a bunch of these players in the Black Knight, as well as the 2 Spellbreakers as well, it's just no longer good enough against even Warlock either. You have to clear the board or develop multiple taunts at the same time.
Turner just burns a card because reasons, style points, I guess.
I mean, it's whether he plays it and then taps after.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. He's just
card.
exactly. It's just to lose the health for Hooked Reaver. Yeah, as we've been pointing out.
Saying, literally style points. Just to tilt people. That's all it was.
Well, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
As now Rugal just drawing, nothing happening at all for the whole game here. And now it's just over. There's no way he can save himself.
Just hasn't done anything. He's just rolled over and died. Double armor on the Spellstone. Upgrades means there's 10 in play, meaning Turna would need 7. 7's a great break point to create against Warlock. They're very unlikely to be able to do it from hand.
It's true.
Still, so much pressure yet to come from Turna.
And with Rugal's list, I believe not running Trog Gloom Eater in there, it means even with a pickup of Master Oakheart, there's no way he can create multiple defensive taunts on a single turn to protect him from either Spellbreaker or Black Knight. And again, the defensive spells from Druid are not good enough to fight back against such high health minions, especially when finally the card we've been talking about for the whole game, the Hooked Reaver, comes down to start finishing things off.
Yep, and as I said, Turna wanted to ration his health to the point where just as he was running out of threats, he would be able to activate a 7/7, and his hand looks pretty out of threats to me right now. Looks like he timed it perfectly.
And there we have it, game 1 going to Turna. As I was kind of indicating at the start, maybe starting to see the signs for Rugal, that Taunt Druid could be the weak spot for him against Turna's very aggressive lineup.
Yeah, it very well could be, and it's also worth noting that we've been calling out potentially the Warlock as the weak point of the aggro lineup a lot of the time. Not so against the particular lineup that he's coming up against, potentially just more of the rogue kind of lineups that suffers to. But still, it's one of the decks that just doesn't have quite the win rate that he would have liked it to, coming in alongside all those other aggressive decks. But still, with the Warlock over the line, and still the Druid to pick up a win. Paladin, Shaman, which one of those two are you really looking to pick up a win on with the Druid?
I mean, they both function relatively similarly up against the Druid from Rugal. It's just about dominating the board early on. The Paladin generally can be a bit more aggressive, which usually plays to their advantage. But then on the Shaman side, why they can't get such an aggressive start, they have more reactive answers to fight through the taunts in the form of something like Hex.
Yeah, well, we'll find out for ourselves very shortly, but for now, players just need a moment to compose their thoughts. Don't go anywhere, guys. Plenty more action coming right up.
My name is Marco Castiglioni, and I'm from Italy. I enjoy competition so much in every aspect of my life. That's why I enjoy playing Hearthstone.
Turna can go book his spot in the Summer Championships. He's done it.
It's difficult to balance time between studying and playing Hearthstone. So most of the time I just concentrate myself on one or another. When a tournament is near, I just play Hearthstone. And when a tournament is finished, I start studying for my exams. This is the 3rd time I'm playing a high-stake tournament, so I'm getting used to it, and I hope that this time I'm not going to lose in the early stage. Winning the tournament will mean a lot for me. I will invest some of the money in one startup, because after I'm finished my studies, I would like to start a company. And of course, I will bring my girlfriend in an expensive restaurant. I promise that to her. Hey guys, thank you for voting me and supporting me and having faith in me. So I hope for everyone that I'm going to bring you packs.
我叫卢卡，我来自中国。其实这次比赛也没什么压力，因为很多其他地区的选手也有很多是比较新的选手，可能只要好好打比赛，就发挥自己的正常水平就没关系了。 相对于比较平淡的工作，我更喜欢炉石比赛中紧张刺激的感觉，然后努力去思考、去战胜对手这种感觉。我的朋友是比较支持我的，然后家人最开始可能不太理解，然后在我慢慢坚持，然后取得一定的成绩以后，家人也开始理解并支持我。因为可能是我比较，因为我第一次参加比赛，他们对我不了解吧，然后对我的风格都不太了解吧，意味着我会有更强的，意味着我有更强大的信心去面对以后的比赛，以后的炉石职业生涯。
Rugal saying there that no one really knows him, so maybe we can help out on that front. We've got a little bit of his tournament record history here. He has actually won one of those Open Gold Series events that we were talking about, that Lee has several second place finishes. Again, if you weren't around, we were talking about that earlier. In China, those events are sometimes like 1,024-man open events. He's taken one of those home for himself. Second place in another one, is currently 13th in standing on the Chinese circuits. But most importantly to me, he is a fighting game fan. He's named after a King of Fighters character, actually kind of a boss character in the King of Fighters series, which I guess is quite fitting because he's now the final boss of this group for Turna himself.
We have turned
Nice.
our curse into
Beautiful transition there, my friend. That was just the most subtle thing I've ever heard. You talk about fighting games, Oh, Hearthstone's here as well.
If you're playing Hearthstone caster bingo at home, someone who talks about fighting games is crossed off right now.
Exactly.
Tink Master Overspark, Darren. Thoughts, concerns?
So I guess, like, when I look at it, when you see Tink Master Overspark in the current meta, the first thing you think is anti-taunt druid tech, because it dilutes the pool of beasts. But I think the main thing here is, while there is an auxiliary effect of it, it helps in certain instances. The main thing is you just have a pretty decent chance of making a Devil Saw out of one of your own dudes, because you have such a high chance of having more minions on board than your opponent. So you just turn one of them into a giant dinosaur. That seems pretty good.
Turna just presses hero power on turn 2 as opposed to playing 1-drops. Harder than it might seem.
Brutal. Is that as savage as it gets?
Couldn't possibly comment, Derek.
As for Turner, I want to point out in his mulligan, throwing away a whole bunch of cards that I think some slightly less confident players might consider keeping, like Firefly. It's a 1-drop, you can play it on turn 1, curve into your hero power very nicely. But I think he's realizing you have so many 1-drops in your deck that against the likes of a Warlock, you want to be going for some of the more high-value cards, like exactly Level Up. It's not quite as devastating in this matchup as it is against the likes of, say, a Druid, but it's still, because you're vulnerable to Hellfire, but still bumping up the power of all your little dudes and forcing your opponent to kill them off before it even comes down is very threatening indeed.
Yeah, I think a long time ago when Odd Paladin first appeared, this was true. I haven't rechecked these stats recently. Well, hang on a second.
Oh!
Stop my nerdy stat discussion for a second, because there was just Hearthstone random nonsense happening for a second. Anything could have happened, and Turner got what was a pretty good result in the end. But I was going to say, if you looked up the mulligan statistics on Odd Paladin, Level Up in the opening hand was one of the highest win rate cards, still is. But what was interesting is that the keep percentage never reflected that.
Really?
Not enough people were keeping Level Up to justify the win rate that it had.
As now here for Rugal, with that very nice result of the Tink Master Overspark, now he needs to be thinking, okay, if I go for Spellstone here, I clear off the dinosaur, obviously, but then I'm left with a board that doesn't really work all too well in my favor. Outside of that, he can go for attacking and Hellfire to completely clear off the board, but that has to be considered a win for Turner in that scenario.
It's an interesting play with the Tink Master on the previous turn. He had a Void Ripper turn, which was okay.
Respectable.
It was passable. But with double Level Up in hand, Turner really needs to tunnel quite hard on, extending a bunch of 1/1s onto the board. And the most likely scenario there that wasn't really bad for you was one of your recruits got transformed. And,
Yeah.
you know, regardless of whether it's then a 1-1 or a 5-5, it's no longer a 1-1. Obviously, the dinosaur is significantly better than even the buffed form with level up.
Yeah.
But still, it was definitely a risk. It's how you know Turner's a gamer. In a high-stakes situation like this, you just let that Tink Master rip.
And I think here for Turner, it's maybe indicating that he's got his eyes set on not the most aggressive game plan, or I guess to say as he is attacking through here, he's got a backup plan. He doesn't need to use level up necessarily as quickly as he possibly can. He can go for one aggressive push here, hopefully draw out a removal with his decent push here in terms of minions, and then follow up afterwards with a decent level up.
I wonder.
Woo! That is brave.
Were you thinking of attacking into the... Oh no, of course, 15 health, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's nothing
Yeah.
particularly complex going on here. That was just a decision straight up for the cost of 1 damage, whether to put Rugal to 1 to face or not. And you know, while you were talking, I was considering, you know, does this help you push lethal with Hellfire as your opponent's option? Does it help you push lethal with Defile as your opponent's option? I can't say that I see it personally.
I guess the thinking is, though, if they play the copy of Hooked Reaver this turn, you're pretty fine with that. A 7/7 is not all that scary, because
That's
you
true.
could just go with a level up. You have 2 of them in hand, +2/+2 to a couple of your minions is pretty threatening indeed.
That was worst case scenario for Turner right there, though, the Defile coming down, because this is the punish now. If you left them above 16 and you got your board cleared, you could redevelop, and perhaps they don't have the explosivity to punish you very quickly while you try and redevelop onto the board.
Right.
Now lowering them to 15 and then you get punished yourself puts you in a bit of trouble. But obviously, Rugal just has life tap available to it.
Right, yeah,
So
yeah.
16 is not actually a big deal because they can always pull themselves down below 15. It's when they're around 18 that it actually becomes the most difficult decision.
Yeah, I think here for Turner, it was just the case of sneaking in an extra damage once he actually thought about it, because in the immediate, seeing on that turn a Hooked Reaver was not that bad. Or actually, he had 5 mana, so we could have gone tap into Hooked Reaver anyway.
I wonder.
Now for Rugal, starting to see, at least in the immediate, the cracks are showing in Turner's game plan, because Rugal can obviously start to seize back board control here, developing something like a Shroombra with a Sun Fury Protector just to pull things back in his favor. But until he can get enough minions on board to trade 1-for-1 with these recruits every single turn, Turner will still be making more recruits than he's losing every turn,
Right.
and thus level up will get some kind of value.
Rugal just deciding he wants an 8/8 instead of the Shroom Bullet Brewer play. The Shroom Brewer play did look promising, but
Yeah.
can make a bigger taunt this way with the Sun Fury Protector. And now Acidic Swampoos can actually be a really clutch draw, because typically when Odd Paladin starts to fall this far behind, Vine Cleaver is the card that they need to really go long-term value, and Rugal now has that checked as well.
I think as a counterpoint to Rugal's strategy here, by going face with the Drake, maybe he's trying to think that he can go for some kind of a lethal possibility. But I think by going for Shroombra to heal up his Drake, taunt both of them up, and start clearing off these 1/1s, it leaves him a lot less vulnerable to one of the cards he's most vulnerable to in level up, or even just a raid leader, something that benefits from a wide board. Could have been pretty devastating there for Rugal.
Is he in a particularly bad position against level up this way, though? The Giant still can't get dealt with, right? It's not like...
It's fair.
And now this way, the 4/1 can just get to trade with a 3/3 anyway. If he Shroombrewers it next turn, he still gets a value trade against one of the buffed recruits. Or he could just Hellfire nuke if he really feels like it.
And I guess also with this game plan he's going for here, he's less vulnerable to Vine Cleaver, because his opponent would have to attack into an 8/8 rather than a nice Shroombrewer.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, so I guess I can definitely see the benefit. The other downside, I suppose, is you don't get to use Shroombrewer on a taunted minion, which kind of ends up like you're gaining the health anyway.
Right.
If they can't silence it, he might have to use it on his face later on. But even here, he can still use it on something like the Giant. So the more I look at it, the more I can actually start to respect this play.
Something like the Giant.
Or the Drake.
Are Drakes like Giants?
Relatively. In the scale of everything in the universe.
they're both in Hearthstone,
Yeah,
so that's one
exactly.
thing they've got going for them. This Doomsayer play is pretty spicy as well. Because he's but this time, when we're talking about, last turn, debating whether or not he was vulnerable to the level up, this turn he is quite clearly vulnerable to a level up, just efficiently trading through that giant with that recruit if he can generate more board.
Yeah.
But now the Doomsayer behind that really makes him start to struggle and need an answer to that as well. But this is one of the reasons, Darek,
Oh, yes.
why there's a certain little tech card sitting in his hand.
Here's time to rip some voids.
But now the Mountain Giant is just getting more obnoxious. If you turn this from an 8-5 to a 5-8, that's not good for you.
But killing off a Doomsayer is really good for you. I think you've got to make the best of a pretty dire situation here. Your opponent is clearly starting to lock down board. As soon as you lose board control, like Rugal will develop 2 minions on the following turn, I think it's fair to say. He would probably do it over a Lich King even in that scenario because he knows he needs a wide board to start trading off. Or at the very least, he'll have some kind of removal, like a Hellfire or a Dread Infernal, at which point your 1/1s just won't stick. He has to keep this board and go for one final big push here as Turna.
It was just a really sucky Void Ripper. And maybe Rugal had identified that as well with the position, because not only did he rebuff the health on the Giant, make it harder to get through, he also turned the Sun Fury into a 3-2, which then just contested his buffed recruit, the largest minion that he had on board.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Not pleasant.
Now Rugal letting Turner know his final attempt at pushing for lethal has not worked out all too well whatsoever. As long as Rugal here does not leave himself vulnerable to any of the really obvious cards like Vine Cleaver, obviously keeping the acidic Swamp Ooze back to deal with that. It looks to me like Turner, without even a single copy of Divine Favor in his deck, needs to be looking for exactly that if he wants to have any kind of chance.
Yeah, that's why I just checked as well. Rugal hasn't had the ability for the majority of this game to play around Divine Favor, but he hasn't made much of an effort to either, it has to be said. And Turner, with only one copy in the deck, has just not had the best odds of punishing that as he could have done. When you're building an aggro deck, or building an aggro lineup even, to potentially take down very greedy control decks in the metagame, that is a decision that you've got to think long and hard about, because Divine Favor, since Hearthstone's inception, has just been one of the biggest control crushers in the game.
Absolutely. I think after a certain point, though, for Rugal, he realized if he had it, he would have played it right now, and I'm not going to start playing around a top deck. So tapping as much as he can feels fine. But now in this scenario, again, dominating the board as much as he can, even not clearing off a 1/1, is he that vulnerable to a level up? There's not really much that can punish him.
Yeah, I think Rugal was just subscribed to the theory that the safest play is to end the game as quickly as possible. Forget all this trading nonsense to play around 3-card combinations that still don't lose you the game, even if they happen.
Right.
Just get the game ended. Your opponent's blown up, they can't come back.
As this matchup does seem to be wrapping up in Rugal's favor. This is a matchup that I'm actually pretty glad that we got to see, because I believe it was Muzzy very recently towards the end of the season who hit top 10 on 2 different servers with this odd Paladin, had like a 20-4 record against Warlock. Like, it was insanely good, he said, as long as you know the matchup, or he was just playing against bad players. But clearly here for Turner, not going quite so fortunately as he does. Equalize the game for Rugal 1 game apiece.
Yeah, and the most important moment there is that Rugal chose to end the game with the Dread Infernal and not the Argent Commander, which was strictly correct, as he nicely cleansed the entire board of 1/1s at the same time while achieving perfect lethal. Nicely done.
The spiciest of lethals.
Yeah, of course. If you can kill everything on board at the same time, that's just better.
Absolutely.
You just get bonus points. You win 2 games.
Just to be clear, you don't.
Hang on, let me just check the rules real quick. No, I made that up.
Right, brilliant.
Okay. Yeah, but still, Rugal, very important win for him to square up the series, because these aggressive decks do threaten to run away with the series if left unchecked. I think even Warlock was the best deck for him. It's a very, very good anti-aggro deck because of the tools, you know, Defile, Hellfire, Dread Inferno, all of these options that they have, plus the cards that punish you for being aggressive, the Hooked Reavers and so on. So it's got a lot of great anti-aggro tools, and you know, we've talked a lot on our casts in particular about, you know, important and unimportant wins in Conquest, and it feels like for Rugal's lineup, don't know if you agree, that even Warlock was the one that was going to be the easiest to get a win with, potentially.
I would definitely agree with you. I would definitely hear argument that Control Mage is also favored against the aggressive decks, especially when you draw hands like that.
That looks
pretty perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'd take that hand. Obviously, it's important against any kind of aggressive deck, aggressive board-based deck like Odd Paladin in particular, to get those board clears, clear things up before level up can completely dominate you, as we saw almost happen in the last series. But then the follow-up of Frostlich Jailer, although it's a 9-mana card against an aggro deck, really doesn't feel all that bad to me.
None will survive. The light dim.
Well, it helps. It was something, because the rest of the hand was looking pretty miserable from Turner's perspective. And that is something where if there weren't really early minions coming out from Rugal, then this is a minion that could end up doing a ton of damage alongside that Blessing of Might. Very similar to, you know, something we've talked about a lot, the Firefly Cobalt combination in Rogue, but the Raven Familiars are going to start to shut this down, although I would still like to see Turner go in with it on the next turn. He can trade out the Raven Familiar, regenerate his 1/1 tokens, and then jam the Blessing of Might and start pushing.
I would absolutely agree with you, having the double benefit of making a minion that's very difficult to deal with, and also disrupting your opponent's mana. If they have to, say, ping on the following turn instead of developing another Raven Familiar or a Stonehill Defender, something like that, it's a real win for you, because you're disrupting your plan, getting in that early damage, and then hoping, as we see with the Odd Paladin against a lot of decks, to just close things out with Vine Cleaver, because that can be a very valuable tool in the later stages of the game to try and win through burst damage.
Stonehill Defender might just be super clutch in this position. It's interesting because you are very heavily incentivized in Rugal's position to ping that 4/1 at some point in the near future, so that when you cast Dragon's Fury, when you're forced to, it does eventually clear it out. So, you know, if you play Stonehill Defender this turn, when are you allocating that ping? Do you just trust the Stonehill does it for you?
I mean, I think you just trust that you can Stonehill on this turn, as you said, take off the Divine Shield, and then as your primary plan on the next turn, Raven Familiar into ping. And then if things go really drastically wrong somehow, you still have the ability to go Coins Dragon's Fury to completely destroy the board.
It's asking a good amount from Turner to be able to kill this Stonehill Defender without losing his Divine Shield, right? Especially when you've seen one Blessing it might get used already. So I think it's definitely a reasonable bet, but I think you saw Rugal's mannerisms on the turn. He drew Stonehill, he picked up the Stonehill and went, wow, this Stonehill's great. Then he stopped and probably had a very similar thought process to what we went through, but then ended up not really seeing any better options, just dropping the Stonehill Defender down. Ends up with a bonus Tar Creeper in hand, which one of the best anti-aggro minions in the game overall, so can't fault him there. And yeah, now Turner is just a little bit stuck.
And really needs to consider what his game plan is in the immediate. Does he want to go for a slightly slower value line of play by going for Diamol into hero power, trying to weave those in every single turn to give himself the maximum value from, say, Level Up or Fungal Mancer? Or does he want to play a little bit faster, just play his minions as quick as he can with Stonehill into Diamol? Do you think he should be playing it slower or quicker in this matchup?
Well, I'd like to answer your question with several follow-up questions that you can choose to answer as you see fit. Personally, I do like the hero power. That's happening in my world regardless, because you have to threaten level up the next turn. My questions are about the Diamond, which is it worth having on the board with the threat of coin Dragon's Fury coming down? Because your opponent kind of has to coin Dragon's Fury this board if they don't want to get level upped anyway. The Diamond is pretty much a non-factor in their decision to do that, right? It's almost the same board state either way. Secondary question, does the Diamol make a difference if you just keep it in your hand?
Well, we know that these very cheap cards are good at filling out the mana cost, especially when you have, well, Fungal Mancer in hand. It means one minion sticking there on the board, if it were to, would make a very big difference on turn 6. But then I guess the chances of a single minion being on board on turn 6 when the mage relies so heavily on complete board clears is very low indeed. So I think maybe just pushing this in for 1 damage on the following turn is not that ridiculous, and maybe it baits out the Dragon's Fury a turn earlier than Rugal would have liked to.
I don't think that unassuming little mole makes any difference in that decision. I totally agree. 1 damage is 1 damage, and I value 1 damage.
Right.
I think that is a valid argument. I don't think the Dire Mole is ever the difference between your opponent choosing to Dragon's Fury or not choosing to Dragon's Fury.
Very fair point. Turner there. Off of the Stonehill, hitting the 1 card you want to hit above all others. The 1 card that he wishes would be buffed to 7 mana in Sunkeeper Tarim, which gives you a chance in pretty much any matchup with this odd Paladin deck.
To give you an insight into how dumb some of the conversations in the caster green room are backstage, we were talking about, you know, how Odd and Even brought this weird dynamic where you could buff cards, right? Like buff Bloodlust to 6 mana,
yeah,
buff Tarim to 7 mana. And then I think it was Admirable, I don't want to call him out, I said, well, yeah, but what if you just buffed it to 5 mana? Like, also known as actually buffing it.
Yeah,
that's
ruining the joke.
The point of the conversation whatsoever.
As for Turner now, he needs to be very cautious indeed about throwing down this Sunkeeper Tarim, because make no mistake, it is the trump card now for him in this matchup. He wants to use this when he puts himself in a position that he can't really lose anymore.
It's a very good looking Void Ripper though. Much more appealing than the last one we saw Turner have to use.
Yeah.
Easily helps him chew through this Tar Creeper, and now he gets to press a bit of damage here, or he can trade out. But
Move quickly.
I think you have to be pushing damage in this matchup wherever you can,
yeah,
and you're also essentially Wind Furying 2 of your recruits into that Enchanted Raven when you have level up in your hand. That Enchanted Raven can only challenge 1 of your recruits.
Yeah. That's not an analogy I've heard in a very long time now. That's a classic caster meme. Wind Furying the minion.
Trading is just giving your opponent's minions Wind Fury and Taunt. That's how it works.
It's such a needlessly complicated way of explaining
yeah, it really is.
You miss a damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. But still for Turner, picking up some of the very nice cards in this matchup. 2 Fungalmancers. He basically just wants any of the high-value cards he can get his hands on now. Anything that benefits off of a wide board, because still from the Mage, even though they have access to a huge amount of board wipe options still in hand after using the Meteor and the Dragon's Fury, Turner should be able to stick some kind of a board every single turn, even if it's just 1 other tiny minion and 2 minions from the hero power.
What to do? What to do?
And Turner has just sacrificed little bits and pieces of damage here and there, which takes away from a few of his outs. He now is kind of locked in to having to stick a board, whereas, you know, if you are a little bit more aggressive, push a few extra points of damage here and there, such as against that Enchanted Raven on the previous turn, you do get those outs we were talking about where, you know, you just rip Vine Cleaver off the top and it's enough pressure to get there.
Yeah.
We can see that probably isn't going to work because Rugal's just far lefting Frostlich Jaina right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, that generally lines up with the Vine Cleaver clock pretty well. But from Turner's perspective, sight unseen, unless he has a read on that far left keep that hasn't been used yet from the Mulligan, which he might.
Yep.
It's a very reasonable read to make. You know, should be thinking he can potentially push some damage here. If he does have that read on Frostlich Jaina, then it's a very different game plan, right? Because then he does understand that he needs to keep hold of the board.
Yeah, that's true. I think the other thing that's making him think he needs to gain control of the board is while he would be getting 1 or 2 points of damage in by pushing face a little bit more aggressively, if that means he loses even 1 or 2 recruits, the power of Sunkeeper Tarim and the damage that would be lost by buffing up a couple more minions is mitigated so drastically. And because he doesn't have Vine Cleaver in hand or Leroy in hand, he's got Sunkeeper in hand. He needs to play to the strengths that his hand is affording him, which is getting a wide board and buffing it up.
Let me think.
Reporting for duty.
As now Turner's plan of going super wide on the board and playing a little bit slower with the hero power every single turn rather than just getting rid of his hand onto the board as quick as he can is working pretty fantastically for him. He's baited out a good amount of removal spells from his opponent, and he's still in a very dominant board position.
He is choosing to commit the Tyrant here, which is reasonable. It requires a 2-turn AoE setup from the opponent or a Flame Strike that doesn't fully clear.
Yeah.
Which is a very, very reasonable thing to demand from the opponent. Double Artificer with Blizzard, though, is not good news for Turna. He would have been okay seeing the Blizzard and then forcing his opponent to kind of do a similar turn on the follow-up turn, but with the 2 Artificers coming down, that he really has no way to challenge from hand. That is horrible news, because that's 12 already gained from Turna, from Rugal, and Turna will be expected the same again next turn, basically.
He absolutely will, but he could if he wanted to. Okay, I was going to say he could make the read that his opponent doesn't have Flame Strike, which I think is fair because Rugal probably would have gone for Flame Strike there instead.
You think?
Oh, no, you're right, actually. Would have saved it for this turn.
Yeah, so like Artificer,
Yeah.
just into Flame Strike pings seem pretty strong.
Well, I was just thinking if he could go for a level up there to buff his board up to make it less vulnerable to a small board clear, but I guess with a Blizzard already being played, the difference between 1 and 3 health is pretty small indeed, so getting the level up for guaranteed charge damage, I suppose, does make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Pop quiz, what does this Witchwood Piper draw right now?
Doomsayer?
Probably right.
I suppose, looking at it, yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I'm going to say definitely Doomsayer as I take a look at the deck lists. Rugal not including the somewhat popular Novice Engineer that seems to be finding its way into a fair few of the competitors' deck lists. Man, oh man. It kind of staggers me that at any point people thought Arcane Artificer would not be a powerful card just because in control decks you don't want to be playing these little 1-drops.
Was that a thing?
I think I heard a few people say it wouldn't be that good.
Okay. It's interesting because there's some debate from people who actually like playing Arcane Artificer on turn 1 in this matchup.
Yeah.
Just to stop the dudes getting out of control from the Paladin side, which I can definitely get on board with. But you see, just still, even in the late game, so much time ball. It's really not a matchup where often you're forced to just face down damage, where you just desperately need to scramble and gain health. But man, when 20 armor gets stacked up on top of board control as well, it sure is demoralizing.
That's 20 dudes it's now counteracted instead of a measly 2 if played on turn 1, and you cannot argue with that 1 iota. Unless those dudes are 5/5.
Odd Paladin is a deck that no matter how many dudes you can deal with, they can keep making fresh dudes every turn.
Brilliant. That was almost a joke. Well done, mate. You were really close that time.
I worked really hard on that one.
As now for Rugal, still trying to find that opportunity where he can play Frostlich Jaina. And given that he's staring down, what, 13, 15, 18 damage on the board and finds himself at, what, 23 health, it's a little bit scary to be throwing down Frostlich Jaina on this turn. But man, he's taking the risk here. And that was 23-5 over. He gains another 5. Is he just dead?
28, there's 10, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18 on the board, plus 10.
Oh no, he's 2 off.
Plus 8, yeah, plus
2
8
off.
from the level up.
Whew. That's a very risky play for Rugal because there was a card that has not been played for a long time off the mulligan. It wasn't Baku because it's already been played. There's not many other cards that it could have been, I would argue.
And now, suddenly, that 20 armor that he was able to pick up is all that was keeping him alive, but out of nowhere!
That's it! Surely.
The board state has been found.
There's no armor gain. He can heal for 3 and freeze the 7/5. Meteor the other side.
The other 7/5.
Yeah.
Which would put him at 5 with 6. He's still dead. No, he gets to ping the other 3/1 as well. Yes, he can ping off this other 3/1, freeze the 7/5,
Survive at
and there's
1
only
health.
4 damage in play.
Oh.
5 from Rugal. And that's not damage. Oh boy, this suddenly got a lot closer than it appeared to be.
This is staggeringly close. No armor gain available to Rugal now with Frostlich Jaina and both Artificers being played, but those elementals always just seem to find a way to build up health in ways they have no right to do so. And it is just one decent spell for Rugal away from clearing up this board and maybe irreparably gaining the board state, or at least healing out of range of any kind of nonsense.
Right. You're right over there.
It's so close. It's so close.
Do you need a drink of water? Need a minute?
Need a drink of water. Elemental.
Hey!
Hey, got him.
Must move quickly.
We just high-fived for context at home. It was awesome.
Needs to be made clear. I think this was Turner's big debate this turn, though. One corridor creeper or two.
I mean, I think you just got to make it as difficult as you can for your opponent to clear, as he does see. Rugal simply concedes after taking what was an unbelievable amount of damage on the Frostlich Jane return. Generally, he was going with the correct game plan. You want to be playing it first and clearing the board after, so you're healing with elementals in the meanwhile. But I have to question that. There was a card right from the start it had been kept, and it was the level up, massively punishing his plan of not clearing the board, playing a little bit too greedy, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tale of two keeps, right? There was a level up keep from Turner that ended up completely crushing the game.
Yep.
There was a Frostlich Jaina keep from Rugal on the other side that when he had to play it, it just wasn't good enough. Again, it's a fantastic card in the matchup, but that was an incredible game of Hearthstone. Turn the corner at the most unexpected moment. It's now Rugal that will have to turn the corner in this matchup. He's going to need to, and we'll find out if he can do that right after this.
With the developers.
The esports scene in Hearthstone being as friendly and as interactive as it is, I would have to say is probably, at least in part, attributed to the fact that it really is intended to be a game for everyone. It's meant to be easy to learn, easy to get into.
We always wanted Hearthstone to be kind of a warm, friendly, welcoming game, and although there is this competitive aspect to it, we've strived to make the game very friendly.
Oh, are you watching? Are you watching right now?
Well, I think the vibe of Hearthstone itself is one about coming together. You know, it's about the tavern, it's about all these people, races coming together across time and space to enjoy a game of Hearthstone together. And I think that vibe actually really carries over into real life when you're playing Hearthstone.
I think there's a lot of charm and whimsy to Hearthstone that kind of keeps it lighthearted.
I think it's a little bit harder to get too tilted over something that's just like inherently a little bit goofy.
It's legendary.
There's also the fact that it's a single player. It means there's not as much inter-team conflict that can occur, and negative play happens, the player kind of knows, oh, I made a mistake, or I'll keep that in mind, I'll do better next time.
It's very important to have really good practice partners in Hearthstone, and especially if you want to be a competitive player, and sharing ideas, sharing strategies. And a lot of what's best about Hearthstone is when you're playing with friends and trying to work together to solve the problem of a specific tournament.
Despite it being like competitive, you still are having a great time with it, and you still have moments that you laugh about. Sometimes cynically when all 8 missiles hit face or something.
That's gonna happen to you, right? Like, that's kind of what makes the game great in some respects. You're just having a lot of really cool Ragnaros shots hitting you and missing you, and like having the bullet whiz by your head and hit your minion, and like that that heart palpitation going, and like those moments are just core to Hearthstone, I think.
2017 Hearthstone World Champion!
This will be, I think, the first APAC tour stop for Season 2.
I am cheering for Stars.
最大改变就是好像突然很多人都在台湾的人都认识。
It's a bunch of smart, cool people that you want to hang out with.
Gia, you need to tell us where it's good.
Follow your nose.
The way the decks line up, I don't think he ever gets there is the thing.
That's it! That's gonna do it!
Oh my gosh!
And we are live at the Blizzard Arena. If you're not lucky enough to be part of this fantastic audience, if you're following along at home, use that hashtag right there, HCT Summer, to join the conversation on Twitter and other social media. Derek, game number 4. It was Turna who, out of nowhere, seized that game to take the 2-1 advantage and put himself one game away from completing the clean sweep of European competitors getting through to top 8. Although, I do want to just add a little asterisk to something that A8 said in his interview earlier. He said it was possible for all 4 Europeans to go through as the top 4. That is not possible. 2 Europeans will be facing each other in top 8 if they do all qualify.
It breaks my heart to see it.
I mean, we can still brag that the only thing stopping it from happening is that it was literally impossible.
And we will. Make no mistake.
Oh, yes,
we will. As it seems to be as we enter the later stages of day 3, games are just getting crazier and crazier. In the previous series, we saw, what, a Twilight Acolyte onto a Cabal Shadow Priest on a Hadronox just to completely blow the game out of the water against a Taunt Druid. It was truly awesome to see that ending. And there, Turna delivering an insane amount of damage against Frostlich Jaina that you basically can just usually concede when you see that come down as an odd Paladin. But here, the even Shaman should be a little bit slower, a tiny bit less explosive usually than the odd Paladins are.
Flame Tongue, Totem, and a Dream. Knife Juggler, please cooperate. Yes, it does. So now Turna has to trade first, right? There's no upside. He has, if he'd have missed that first knife, it becomes a bit more technical because he still has like Coin, Merc Spark, or Eel as a counter option. But yeah, having hit the first knife, just trade through the 6 damage, get that 1 damage guaranteed to face afterwards. Good sequencing from Turna. And now Rugal is just trying to stall, essentially. He does have turn 5 Dragon's Fury, turn 7 Flame Strike, turn 8 Flame Strike if required, but he's going to want to stretch out those AoEs a little bit longer than that, because if he's just throwing them out willy-nilly as soon as they're available, then Turna will have enough refill to keep building past that, pretty much exactly as we saw in the previous game with the Paladin. Although the odd Paladin's probably a little better at doing it than the even Shaman, would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. Obviously, the odd rather than the even hero power scales a lot better into the late game because you are using more stuff with your mana when you've run out of cards as opposed to just getting the same benefit you would whether it cost this original 2 mana hero power. But I would argue for Turna, he has some very nice benefits of having a wide board that you don't always have as the odd Paladin. Level Up obviously only benefiting off of the dudes from the hero power. Turna can get some very nice value off of the likes of Flame Tongue or Direwolf Alpha, which still means it's a very similar scenario for Rugal. He doesn't want to clear the board every turn, but he's going to take a lot of damage if he doesn't.
Yeah, so now the scary card for Rugal to see here is an activated Corpse Taker. And by activated, I mean Wind Fury and Divine Shield. I don't care about either of the other 2 buffs in any situation. The Taunt and the Lifesteal or whatever. You want Divine Shield and you want Wind Fury, and it's your big AoE protection card, because it means if Rugal would want to Dragon's Fury down this whole board, you then get to smack them for 6 minimum on the following turn with that Corpse Taker, but Turna has no such luxury, so his options are further develop into AoE or pass.
None of which feel particularly good, but for the moment here for Turna, I think he's going to be going for a relatively similar game plan, again, that we saw from the odd Paladin. Hero powering as much as possible, making boards that are not devastatingly powerful, but still punish your opponent if they don't clear him, if he doesn't clear them off, because then the punish for if the board is cleared, because you can just go Coin Argent Commander on the following turn, push a whole bunch of damage, and they don't have Frostbolt or anything to ping it off with it.
Yeah, people will like to make the claim that, in an aggro versus control matchup, that being on the aggro side is the easier of the 2 equations. And I would dispute that in a lot of matchups, because when you are the guy playing the aggro, you are actually in full control of like the rhythm and the cadence of the matchup, right? You have to decide when you're pushing in, when you're holding back, all of these different options. All the control deck has to do is respond with the right answer at the right time. So in a situation like that, as the aggro deck, you're weighing up all these different thoughts, which is, what's the smallest board my opponent will AoE? What's the largest board that I'm still happy if my opponent AoEs it? Do I want my opponent to AoE this turn? Do they have other removal options that I'm weak to if I don't make them AoE? Like, there's so many things that you just have to consider in a single turn like that. Anyway, TLDR version, he played some stuff, it got AoE.
Absolutely, and I would argue that for the mage, I would agree with you because it's usually pretty clear which removal spell is best. It's just which one you have the most mana for. Can you make a water elemental with it after you've played Jaina? It's generally pretty self-prescriptive as to how you throw it out. But with the Shudderwock Shaman in particular, we've seen a lot so far this tournament. There's been some very creative board clears we've seen with the likes of Pyromancer, Zap off of Hagatha, things like that, able to get a huge amount more damage than immediately meets the eye. Because you have to combo your cards together, whereas with the mage, you can't play two spells on the same turn, basically, for the vast majority of the game.
And now already you can see Rugal is just in a rough spot with the removal situation that he's in. It's not a board that he wants to blizzard, but he's at 15, and there's a Knife Juggler in play. And it's about time the big boys start coming out to play for the Even Shaman. The Argent Commander, the Fire Elemental, and that's the response from Rugal. Polymorphs a Knife Juggler.
That is just the power that Turner's relatively aggressive play has managed to do for him, put himself in such a nice position where he is baiting out those cards. And it's the same situation for Rugal that it seems, for me, is the real reason why Control Mage is struggling so far this tournament is it has great removal options. We know that is the key, but it's so important in the current meta, I find, to both remove and develop. It's not enough just to remove minions turn after turn, because there are so many spells and minions that activate and buff such a measly little board. You need to have minions that are trading into the totems, the 1/1 dudes, things like that. And the mage doesn't really have that possibility. It's not like a Taunt Warrior that we know is very strong in these kind of matchups, where it can play Tar Creepers, Phantom Militias to really lock down the board after something like a Blood Razor hits the board.
Winter is here.
Corpse Taker over Argent Commander that turn. Seems reasonable, right? Argent Commander will have charge, you know, regardless of whether you play it, whereas Corpse Taker needs that one slow turn in order to set up and get going on the board.
And still here for Turner. This is fine. You know, he's having something cleared off, but he's getting in that repetitive 2 damage every turn to the point where Argent Commander gets closer and closer to just finishing out the game. And even then, there's a bunch of extra cards he could get that would really help just lock things out in his favor. The Alakir right up at the top. Obviously, the other Argent Commander, Fire Elemental, Flame Tongue Totem, a whole bunch of fantastic options here for Turner off the top.
Well, that is not a fun-looking Doomsayer for Turner right now, though. He can hex it. He can still develop behind that hex by using the coin here. And the coin has pretty much lost all utility by this point. In Even Shaman, so it doesn't seem unreasonable. He also could just choose to let the Doomsayer go off and then just take the turn to develop Hagatha if he really wanted to.
So you're going into turn 8 for your opponent if you were to go with that line of play. You're then pretty much vulnerable to the Lich King or Syndragosa. They're the only 2 threats you're really afraid of, at which point Hex into Saronite Chaingang is a pretty good follow-up, actually, on that line.
Preserved your Hex is the difference, right? Like, I feel like hexing the Doomsayer and not developing very much, you end up more vulnerable to Lich King, if anything else, because you still don't push lethal through the Lich King, and you end up having to trade a bunch of your board into it instead of just hexing it.
It's a pretty fair point, and it looks to me like Turner has come to the same conclusion. He is not developing enough on this turn, as so often is the case. Using some of your best cards just to deal with a Doomsayer is very often shown in Hearthstone to not be worth it as long as you can deal with the development from your opponent.
Out of my jungle!
I think Rugal here with this Stonehill Defender pickup will be looking for something he can just jam this turn alongside it. Tar Creeper looks nice because now with the Enchanted Raven as well, that fills out the curve beautifully.
And this is the point I was talking about, where Mage has struggled to lock down the board whilst also clearing off the board. And until Frostlich Jaina comes down, that's generally a very difficult task to do. But with the Stonehill, I was going to say, and the Tar Creeper and the Raven coming down on this turn, it felt like it was a lot easier. But I've got to be honest, I find this a somewhat surprising pick.
I do also. There's two big counter swing cards that even Shaman plays. Whenever you start to get control of a board, stop yourself and think and say, okay, don't let your opponent swing back with Fire Elemental or Argent Commander. And I think Rugal has just kind of failed that test right now. He's created a board that allows Argent Commander to swing back against him. But then Turna on the other side decides not to even take that Argent Commander turn.
I mean, I guess outside of that, what is he doing? He doesn't have the hero power of totems anymore. He's instead just got Hagatha's hero power, which will be very nice as long as he's constantly playing out as many minions as possible. But he's going to be met with a pretty strong downside here of just any board clear spell.
A path dimly lit. I must decide. How long can this go on? How long can this go on?
Volcano is not conventionally useful in the sense of, he wants things that buff his minions, he wants things that remove Rugal's minions just 1-for-1 cleanly, he wants burst damage, lava bursts, lightning bolts, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But in the spot that he's in,
it's not
Volcano is a real winner.
Yeah. I think you'd take that every day. You could even throw down a Blazing Invocation if you don't get anything better off the top, just to maybe find some of the more spicy battle cry minions. Could this become a Shudderwock Shaman? Ugh. Sadly, it wasn't to be.
Carnivorous Cube. You've only seen one polymorph get used. Stone Sentinel is kind of interesting. You have Fire Elemental in your hands. This is tough, honestly. Hot Spring Guardian is playable this turn alongside your Volcano if you want to swing the ball.
That's also a good point, actually. I hadn't really considered that. And obviously the downside for Stone Sentinel is pretty much exactly another Flame Strike or even a Dragon's Fury. The way it's positioned out is very weak to any kind of removal. And Turner, they're just thinking, if I could develop in the immediate, that's the most important thing here. He needs to lock down the board sooner rather than later, because eventually Jaina will be found.
Yeah, I think I agree, because it's, it was the last thought to really occur to me, but I think it ends up being the most important one, which is just to not hand back initiative completely to Rugal in that spot.
And the other thing is, he has a whole bunch of expensive cards in hand anyway. He needs to be able to fill it out, play two things a turn here instead.
So Polymorph so far has been used on a Polymorph has been used on a Knife Juggler, a Voodoo Doll has been used on a 2/4. Those are not only the best removal tools, but also the best options you have in your deck for leveraging Wellies, Water Element. And suddenly, if now Rugal gets into a position where he draws Frostlich Jaina, he doesn't have so many tools left for guaranteed Water Elementals. And that is just a spare Fire Elemental.
That looks pretty good to me indeed. Rugal in that same situation where he's got plenty of removal cards in hand, but he's just taken too much damage over the course of the game. And now he's going to have to start using cards incredibly inefficiently, just going for a Meteor on one single minion. And unless some life gain is found, Turner's just going to have lethal in the next couple of turns. He can go Fire Elemental this turn, and then Argent Commander into Earthen Might on the following turn, and he will simply advance to the quarterfinals.
It is all very true. With that Earthshock in hand, I would dispute your sequencing there, because I would have suggested going with Argent Commander Earthen Might first, because it has to go, it can't get through Taunt, but he does have that Earthshock in hand as well, which makes it all pretty much a formality. You know what? Why not? Let's sequence it as if we didn't have the Earthshock anyway. Get the Direwolf alongside it as well, pushing one extra. Rugal is now down to 1. Frostlich Jaina draw here is not good enough. There is lethal presented on board against that. Dragoncaller Alana is completely the wrong 9-drop. No Arcane Artificer. Rugal even has the Witchwood Piper in his deck to tutor that card. Still doesn't find it.
As we prophesized at the start, Turner's aggressive lineup, while finding a struggling point earlier on yesterday, does finally advance through to the quarterfinals, and he is, I believe, our 4th European player through to the quarterfinals, which I've got to be honest, Sottle, feels pretty fantastic on this side of the tavern.
Yeah, 4 Europeans, the maximum number who were allowed to attend, have made it through to top 8, and that is a fact that we are not going to be even a little bit smug about. Congratulations to Turna on completing the sweep. You see there alongside the group winner Jinsu, who's impressed me immensely as well, Derek. I don't know if you share that opinion.
I would definitely agree with you. Very underrepresented or just unknown coming into this tournament, but a decent deck building. The Control Priest could have been a scary point for him in his lineup, but piloting it beautifully. And here for Turna, the main thing I want to raise is we know how good his lineup was coming into the tournament, but in that particular series, one of his weaknesses can be that he gets a little bit twitchy on stage, a little bit nervous under the bright lights, but here, a fantastic level-headed game.
Well, I'll tell you what, we can hear right now from Turna, who's standing by with Cora, about whether he was feeling the nerves in that game.
Rugal has been eliminated, and Turna reigns supreme, advancing to the quarterfinals. The 4th out of 4 possible European players who could advance to the quarterfinals. All 4 of them have made it out of groups. Very, very impressive, not just as a region, obviously, but as a player. Very well done, Turna. I gotta ask, the guys over there, the casters, they've been talking a lot about nerves, about how you tend to, you're very emotional while you play, and it tends to look like you're nervous sometimes. Do you feel like that affects your play ever, or is that something that you're aware of while you're playing?
I think it makes me play better. I feel the pressure a lot, but the adrenaline. So I think I play better and more concentrated, but I always feel so nervous while playing, but I don't think it makes me play worse.
Well, there you go, guys. It doesn't hurt him whatsoever, and obviously, having won your second match, you're moving on to the quarterfinals. Clearly, it didn't hurt you at all this time around. Was there any matchup in particular, maybe anything you were really worried about going into this match? Obviously, aggro versus the big spell mage sometimes can be a little bit difficult, but you got wins there with both the paladin and the shaman. Were you maybe a little worried about that?
Yeah, I was worried. I think I was unfavored against Rugal. But in the single match, everything can happen, and indeed, the Agatha gave me the nuts every time, and it made me win the game.
She's a value machine. I just love her. Final question. As you know, 4 out of 4 of the European representatives are going to the quarterfinals, yourself included. Earlier on, Viper said that he thinks, and I'm doing this purely for the sake of the drama, he thinks you're the weakest European player here. But the results are speaking for themselves so far. You are through to the top 4. Is there anything you want to say to Viper?
As you say, the results speak themselves. So.
All right, well, we'll see what happens in the quarterfinals tomorrow. It's all going down. We've got the entire European region's competitors through to the top 8. And maybe a little bit of a grudge match. Congratulations. Very well done, Turna. Really happy to see you moving on to the quarterfinals. But we've got one more match today, and it's actually going to be a lineup that's very similar to Turna's in that of killing all day. So let's go ahead and send it back to the casters and see, is it really the year of Yokad?
We're going to find out very, very soon. As you said, Cora, the aggro lineup has already shown success. And if anything, Killin, I think we surmised at the start of the tournament, had a stronger group for that aggro lineup to go through. Do you agree?
I would definitely agree. A couple of more of the anti-control decks knocking about, like Rogue and Hunter in his group. So as was predicted in some of the statistics done towards the start, he's looking to be in great shape. And we know that he can pilot these decks very well as long as he's got his head in the game, not letting the pressure of the memes get to him.
There you go. It's time to find out. Is this his year? The year of killing all day could come to fruition very, very soon. He is coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere, guys.